Back now, the 12th Thabo Mbeki Africa Day lecture will be delivered by Nigerian scholar Professor Toyin Falola this evening. The series of lectures was launched after the former president left office in 2008.
I owe my being to the hills and the valleys, the mountains and the glades, the rivers, the deserts, the trees, the flowers, the seas, and the ever-changing seasons that define the face of our native land. Whatever the setbacks of the moment, nothing can stop us now. I am an African.
The then Deputy President of South Africa, during adoption of the South African Constitution in 1996, later in 2002.
Your Excellencies, the meeting is called to order.
Making history as he takes over the leadership of the continental body that was transformed from Organization of African Unity to the African Union. The continental body relaunched primarily to accelerate Africa's integration, position Africa on the global stage, and address the social, political, and economic challenges. The Thabo Mbeki annual lecture will this year take stock of what AU has achieved.
The lecture will be delivered by the distinguished African intellectual, scholar, and academic, Professor Falola, who is a professor of history and the Jacob and Francis Senga Mosika Chair in the Humanities and a distinguished teaching professor at the University of Texas in Austin. Additionally, he is an honorary professor at the University of Cape Town and extraordinary professor of human rights at the University of the Free State. And Professor Falola has written extensively on the humanities, including the humanities in African knowledge production.
The lecture always used by Thabo Mbeki Foundation to celebrate Africa Month. Thabo, SABC News, Johannesburg.
And we have the absolute pleasure of being joined now by this renowned African and scholar in our studio. And this is Professor Toyin Falola, who is delivering the lecture this evening. Professor, so good to have you with us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Yeah, good morning, and thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
As we celebrate Africa Month, we usually use this time to just stop, reflect, take stock of who we are, how far we've come as a continent. What are your reflections overall on Africa and Africa Month in 2022?
Thank you. And we have so many things to celebrate. The unity of our people across this big continent, the unity of places, the link between Lagos, Accra, Joburg, keep expanding, the unity of commerce. The AU created a free zone, which we are working on, and the unity of states, which people tend to focus on. But those unity of people, places, they also allow us to develop continental cultures and unity of our memory that is forged in the common history of slavery, exploitation, domination, which have defined our past, but also given us the challenges to face the future.
And we'll speak to those in a little while, but this is also an opportunity to reflect and commemorate 20 years of the African Union, the establishment of it in 2002. So if we look at the aspirations for this particular body, how would you say it's fared, and what has been its successes to date?
So many, but the cornerstone is the African Agenda 2063, with significant timeline to focus on key economic progress, key economic ideas, with the principal aim of poverty elimination, reducing dependence on other continents, empowering young men and women, transforming the entire continent, developing infrastructural network. There are plans to establish road networks, rail networks, reducing violence, reducing the number of guns, reducing illicit transfer of wealth out of Africa. So we have great ideas on the table So we have to celebrate those ideas. Of course, the elephant in the room is always the implementation. At a time when people are in a hurry, they want this progress very quickly.
How long, though, are we going to keep talking about great ideas, great vision on paper, and no implementation? Because as you rightly state, this is a young continent with many young, able-bodied people who simply do not have the patience to wait. You spoke about Agenda 2063, the alleviation of poverty. You go back to the Millennium Development Goals.
Yes.
We were talking about that. You go back to the Sustainable Development Goals 2030. That is part of the agenda. So at what point do we move beyond the platitudes? At what point do we move beyond things that are written on paper and actually start holding people accountable for making sure that we make progress?
Very good. And at what time do we also cumulate what we have achieved? And I can list some of them. We are citizens of the world. We are not colonial subjects. That in itself is a mental issue, a psychological issue. You may complain that you see little progress, but we are less and less under white domination. That's a victory of substantial impact. The education of women across the continent is a revolution. It wasn't the European powers in Africa that enabled many women to go to school. The transformation of youth, and we are seeing the benefits in terms of the ability to connect to the internet, in terms of their capacity to use technology for development, in terms of the expansion of creative culture, the like that we have never seen before, in fashion, in hairstyle, in aesthetics, the production of Nollywood, South African films. These are big achievements we don't talk about. The expansiveness of the music industry. This is a total liberation that is global. Many Africans now listen to African music. They eat African food. They wear African clothes. These are things we don't talk about simply because we are overwhelmed by other issues such as corruption, political incapacity, and great disappointment. So, but we have to balance all of them so that we look at limitations, but we don't overwhelm ourselves with negativity. And if you look at our communities, parenting, so there's a conversation at the state political level. But if you go to the domestic, if you ask me, what are my kids doing? If I ask you, what are your kids doing? If I ask other people, what are their kids doing? You see tremendous success in parenting, bringing these kids up. And we are beginning to see the rewards in various dimensions, skills, intelligence. But leadership has to now bring them together to transform us. And that is the missing link.
Let me problematize that slightly further, Professor. Is it enough? Your children, my children, I sit on a television show, that allows me certain privileges. I have a well-paying job.
Yes.
I can, therefore, set my children up to achieve certain things. And I would imagine the same for your children.
Correct.
But is it enough? Are enough of our African children afforded those same opportunities?
Yeah, but those opportunities are transformational, transformative, and they're capacity building. Anytime you have human capacity, then that human capacity becomes connected. Now, always using those human capacity. So between the 15th and the 19th century, 40 million people were taken out of the continent because of their muscle power to work on plantations. And then 19th, 20th century, Europeans came. South Africa is even deeper, to convert that muscle capacity in mining, peasant agriculture, and to convert those to profit for their own benefit. So if you look at the combination of a continent devastated by slavery, by apartheid, by colonization, by illicit transfer, if you combine all those, the pain is agonizing, the trauma is agonizing. So we're talking about, in the case of South Africa, liberation since 1994, within a generation. And we are talking about the rest of Africa, 60 years. Compare it to a long history of 500 years of suffering. So I understand the need for us to say this progress is not enough. We are not seeing enough, but we have to put them in context. And the way I explain it is, Africa is like that tortoise with its shell. Everything they've done to us, we are still alive. Slavery, we survive it. Atlantic slave trade, we survive it. Colonization, we survive it. Apartheid, we survive it. There's nothing we have not been able to. COVID, we survive it. That capacity of survivor is in itself an achievement. We have not conquered other continents. We are peace-loving. We have been brutalized when we don't revenge. And in that capacity to avoid revenge, we cleanse our own mentality. We remove poison from our system. So if you look at all the indices, things have to come together. We are very highly educated, one of the most educated people in the world. We've developed tremendous skills. We have positive characters. We are losing some of our values. But by and large, in villages, communities, churches, these values are still there. How now to bring all these things together is still the missing link. So if you go to the United States of Britain and you slice the indices of development, and you say this is education, this is this, all of them are in Nigeria, they're in Ghana. But we have not been able to put them together.
Why haven't we been able to do that? Because just looking at your assertions about how far we've come, if you take what has been done to this continent, how it's been exploited, how, as you say, the slave trade was visited upon our continent. Then you look at what's happening in contemporary Africa, and now you have people leaving their countries.
Yes.
Migration, sometimes for good reasons, where people are looking for opportunity because they've managed to self-actualize to a point whereby they feel that they need to go elsewhere in order to further develop. But there's also the very real reality of people fleeing persecution still today. And unlike people having been forcefully taken out of the continent through slavery, we today have people who risk life and limb to cross oceans seeking
progress
better
for themselves.
prospects.
Yes.
And you come to South Africa at the moment, whereby now you're having tensions between local South Africans and foreign nationals, because South Africans feel that they are being overwhelmed by the influx of other Africans into the country.
Yes, there's never going to be a time anywhere in the world, any country, where they will not have the big issues that overwhelm them. So you see, Russia and Ukraine, they've been overwhelmed. Brexit, complaining about Turkish immigrants, African immigrants, Indian immigrants, they've been overwhelmed. And I'm sure you've heard of the name of one man called Donald Trump, who created a global disaster. They have been overwhelmed. So there will never be a time that the world is not going to be a paradise. That's a myth. That's not going to happen. So how do we manage the crisis that we have? Eritrea, crossing the Sahara. So, and you find we can blame African countries. Yes, we have our own share of responsibility. But bear in mind that the decisions that sometimes lead to these migrations are not taken by us. When you devastate the currencies, when you take the gold out, when you take the diamond out, $85 billion leave the continent every year through all sorts of regulations. If that money are still behind. And then we have the corruption of those who govern us, in which there's a lot of leakages, lack of accountability. Some 2 weeks ago, the Accountant General of Nigeria stole 85 billion. Who wakes up in the morning to even dream of stealing 85 billion? Because you can't even count the money if you start from one. And you can never finish spending it unless you're setting it on fire. You can finish spending it. So we have the combination of internal mismanagement and external exploitation. So when do we liberate ourselves from it? And when do we liberate ourselves from all this calamity? So it's going to happen either through implosion, through revolution, through institutional transformation, through leadership. When is a question, but it's going to happen. Because we don't have a history. What history teaches us is that people are going to say enough is enough. If you're a Christian, you say it in the mythology of the children of Israel in the land of the Pharaoh and the story of Moses and Samuel. You find it in the story of Exodus. You find it in Zulu mythology, Yoruba mythology, that a suffering must come to an end. There's no suffering that will not come to an end. And we've developed mythologies of living beyond the suffering. If you look at it very well, we have to give our fathers, our ancestors, our mothers credit for generating hope. Hope you cannot quantify it. So, why are we happy? I'm not undermining all this crisis, but why do you go to Accra and see happy faces? Why do I walk into this building? The security people may not be well paid. Well, why are they looking happy? So those sources of happiness, we don't pay attention to. We know the sources of the agonies. We know the sources of the suffering. Others we know. So I teach in the US, and they will say, in Africa, they live $1 per day. I say, okay, I will buy you a ticket. I will send you there for 30 days, and I will give you $30. Come and tell me whether you can survive on $1 a day. What is the capacity that makes us survive on $1 a day? You have been paid and been paid. That's your salary. You cannot, under our system, you're not spending it just by yourself. I'm not spending my salary by myself. In addition to my kids, I've sent people to school. I've sent children of my siblings to school. We are not measuring all those. Our capacity for community building, we don't celebrate it. Our capacity to overcome alienation, we don't celebrate it. Our capacity to keep on saying that in spite of our suffering, and you saw it in the history of apartheid, people suffered. I've been to Soweto, I've been to Sharpeville, they suffered. But we don't see the extent to which, out of that suffering, they create hope. It's from rock and stone, they take out water. And so we have so many things to celebrate. That ultimately we have not been destroyed.
This is true, Prof. However, I'd like to argue that there's nothing noble in suffering.
Correct.
There's nothing noble
nobody
in
wishes,
struggle.
Yes.
So, at what point do we say we are better than this?
Yes.
Our people deserve better than this?
And that is a question we have to ask those who govern us. In other words, for instance, if you hire a contractor to destroy a country like Nigeria, a foreign contractor, say from China, Nigerians have done better than that contractor in destroying themselves. You understand? So our capacity for self-destruction, we cannot deny. We can't deny it. But are we going to be able to create institutions in Kenya, institutions in South Africa, that will overwhelm the capacity of individuals to damage us? But it won't come through prayer, just by praying. It will come through a combination of anger, activism, not protests that will damage buildings. We don't want to damage anything. But we have to say, we are not going to allow you to steal money. We are going to say, we are not going to allow you to take policies that will not work for us. Are we seeing some signs? We are seeing some signs where people police their communities, where people police their politicians. We are beginning to see some signs. And you see the coming back of coups in recent years in which they are saying, this democracy is not working. We are not going to tolerate it. And we are going to see how we reform the system. So whether that will work or not, you and I cannot know. But if you review things over time, are we multiplying human capacity? Yes. Are we providing more education? Yes. But are we diversifying the economy enough? No. Are we creating greater opportunities for our people? No. Is the leadership working effectively for maximum benefits to optimize the resources? No. So we have all this no and no and no. But you know, when you wake up in the morning, as an individual, when I wake up in the morning, if I create a catalog of all my problems, my high blood pressure, my diabetes, my headache, I will cripple myself. I will not be able to function. I will not be able to go to work. But I will say, well, let me wake up. The day is mine. Yesterday is gone. And maybe tomorrow I'll make it better for myself. It is this balancing that I'm trying to communicate. That we are not denying the problems, but we don't wake up every day and be denying the problems. But at the same time, we don't work every day and not be optimistic.
You have to get on with it.
Yes.
But as we wrap this conversation, Prof, if we look at, you spoke about the capacity to build institutions,
Yes.
and interestingly, you mentioned nation states. Kenya, you spoke about South
Yes.
Africa. You didn't say the African Union.
Yes.
So the African Union, what is its role in helping this continent realize its ideals and visions, not only set out by sovereign states, but set out by the African Union itself?
Correct. So the fundamentals ensure security and peace.
Can they do that?
To some extent. Prevent how many external, you know, we tend not to realize that we are one of the best continents. You hear civil war there, civil war there. Europeans have killed more people than Africans. We are not the one who created the First World War. We are not the one who created the Second World War. We are not the one who created the Russian-Ukrainian war. How many countries have attacked one another? We have cultural divisions within the continent that we have to manage. So in terms of holding these countries together, the African Union has done well. In terms of the internal management of ethnic crisis, that has been very difficult. Ethiopia, Sudan broke into two. Somalia. We cannot deny any of those.
Chad, Zimbabwe.
Yes. So we cannot deny any of those, right? We can all. I visited as part of a team to congratulate the president of Ethiopia when he won the Nobel Prize. But months later, Ethiopia imploded. We cannot deny any of those. But the mental capacity to put ideas on the paper in resolving all these, we have done. The transition of those ideas on paper to practices, we have not done. Why? Because we have human beings and leaders who work for their own pockets,
Final
not
question,
for their own
Prof.
people.
Just with regard to the funding of
Yes.
all of these ideals.
Yes.
So we talk about governance challenges. And just looking at the AU, we had the headquarters of the African Union built by
the Chinese.
the Chinese.
Yes.
You look at the security and peacekeeping initiatives
Yes.
and the inadequacy of it, as many would point to, in
Yes.
terms of how selectively some across the continent feel certain issues have been dealt with, but that's a story for another day. But you just look at the budget there, and you look at who is funding that.
Yes.
So if we are incapable of funding our own initiatives, where does that place us?
So, correct. A person like me, we're not happy about that. And there are certain things we don't know. Surveillance, espionage, that go on with all this funding. If you can't fund your own institutions, you've already diminished your capacity. Well, let me end with an allegory. So in this big jungle, in this forest, animals said, why are we sleeping in the open, allowing the rain to beat us, allowing the sun to beat us? And fox said, enough, I'm going to build a house. And he built a house. And he called a housewarming party. When it's time to go home, the tiger refused to go. The tiger said, fox, if you don't leave this building, I will eat you alive. Fox lost his house. After overcoming his anger, he built another one. And the lion took it away from him. Now he built the biggest one, called the biggest party. And he knew they would take it away from him. Unknown to them, he had put in place a plan to set the house on fire. When they were drinking and eating, fox set the house on fire to make a statement. Until there is justice, there will be no peace. Without global justice, there will be no peace. Without national justice, there will be no peace. Without parental justice, balancing resources between their 4 children or 5 children, there will be no peace. And on this, I will pray for peace, I will pray for justice, and I will connect both to building humanity that you, I, your children, my children, will benefit from a common pole. Thank you very much.
Professor Toyin Falola, thanks so much for your time this morning and for visiting us here at Morning Love. And of course, Professor Toyin Falola will be delivering the lecture this evening, and that is the Thabo Mbeki Africa Day lecture, and that's taking place today. So Professor Falola will be the keynote speaker at that event. With that, let's take you to news.